Excelsior, true believers! You are about to embark upon a journey, a trip to the 70s and 80s when mighty Marvel Comics ruled over all. The Defenders, Doctor Strange, the Champions, Deathlock, the Submariner, the Incredible Hulk, Killraven, the Son of Satan, the Macabre Man-Thing, and all your other Bronze Age favorites every week appearing on Defenders Dialogue. Now here are your guides, Christopher Golden and Brian Keene.
Excelsior, true believers.
Excelsior indeed, and welcome back once again to Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene.
And I'm Christopher Golden. And Brian, you just had a brainstorm, and I agree with you completely.
Well, I did have a brainstorm, and then I got distracted because we are recording this on Skype, and Skype is being very temperamental for me today. But I know that no matter what Skype does, you and I will still sound good thanks to the efforts of our engineer extraordinaire, Matt Wilderson. Now, Matt not only engineers this podcast, he hosts two podcasts of his own, the Ghostwriters podcast, and, of course, the very popular Grindcast. He's also a very capable author with several books to his credit, and he's also edited his first anthology. If you want to support this show, folks, the way to do it, because we don't have advertisers. Chris and I don't take money for this because people don't want to give us money for this. So the way to support this show is to support our engineer, Matt. Go to Amazon.com, type Matt Wilderson, Wildasin, in the search bar and buy one of his books. Or if you can't afford to do that right now, maybe just give Grindcast a listen or Ghostwriters Podcast a listen. They are available free wherever you are listening to Defenders Dialogue.
There you go. Exactly. And I'm glad, we usually, as you said, we usually plug Matt at the end of the show. But here on episode 145, it was a good idea that you had to plug Matt at the beginning of the show. And the other thing, Brian, is we try when we first get on and are communicating before we start recording, we usually try to avoid talking about the thing that we're going to talk about during the show. And I think that's wise. You said, you enjoyed the story, but it felt like you didn't spark to it the way I did. This is a fundamental Tomb of Dracula story.
I did not. I suspect we're doing a bit of role reversal here with the Defenders Headmen Nebulon saga. You did not quite spark to that the way I did, but it's all about what we were exposed to and loved when we were kids. And as we've talked about on the show before, Tomb of Dracula was one of the rare Bronze Age Marvel books that I never read because it just was not available at the newsstand where I bought my comics or any of the other places I would go. My only exposure to Marvel's Dracula is the Defenders, of course, when he crossed over with the Defenders, which we've covered on this show. And I think an issue of Marvel Team Up. And that was it.
Wow.
Yeah, I
so
did.
So wait.
Since then, I've
still not read Tomb of Dracula except this.
I've read key issues. I've never sat down and read the entire thing.
Wow.
I'm working on that. As you know, I have forsworn buying the collected editions. Instead, I'm buying the actual single floppy issues, and I am working on Tomb of Dracula right now. I've got about 52 issues. This is one of them. So once I get it all complete, I'm gonna read it through. I mean, I've enjoyed what I've read, and I enjoyed this. Yeah. But it didn't. I told you before we hit record, I just don't have a lot of what I feel is insightful commentary the way you will, because you grew up with these characters, you love these characters.
Well, it's funny to me too, because to me, this is a startling admission. I don't think I knew that, because it's sort of like me never having read Man-Thing. Very similar. Because it is a key. I mean, literally, Tomb of Dracula as a series is one of the maybe 4 or 5 major building blocks. Like if you had the keystones, the foundations of my creative brain, this is one of them.
Right.
Not this issue in particular, but this series in particular. I chose this series. So I think, let me just sort of recap for people. So Tomb of Dracula is written by Marv Wolfman and illustrated by the legendary Gene Colan, my favorite of all time Marvel, certainly Bronze Age artist, but also probably my favorite Marvel artist ever. And I was lucky enough to work with Gene on a Blade one-shot while he was still amongst us. But Tomb of Dracula basically is the story of a group of people who's still in the quote-unquote present, which at the time was the 1970s, still hunting Dracula, including multiple descendants of major characters from Bram Stoker's Dracula, including Frank Drake, who himself is Dracula's descendant.
Right.
Rachel Van Helsing, obviously the descendant of Dr. Van Helsing, and Quincy Harker, the descendant of Jonathan Harker. It introduced Blade for the first time. It introduced a character called Hannibal King, who is in many ways the inspiration for my character, Peter Octavian, and so many other things. This issue, Giant Sized Chillers #1, introduces one of my other favorite characters in the Marvel Universe, Lilith, the daughter of Dracula, not to be confused with the Lilith who's the sort of evil mother of monsters from the 90s Ghost Rider series, who I think is much less interesting than this Lilith for me. So in any case, this story is pretty easy to sum up, Brian.
Oh, yeah, we could sum it up in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, so why don't you share your thoughts before I go on with it?
It's a lot of fun. Had this been available to me as a kid in the 70s, I would have loved it. And it's easy to see where your joy for this book comes from. And yes, you're right. It's easy to see its influence on you. Of course, Gene Colan's art, always fantastic. Marv Wolfman at the top of his game here. I enjoyed it, but, I didn't like the supporting cast. I didn't know the supporting cast. Like, there's a scene here where you think one of the main cast members is dead. You think Dracula's killed him. And as I'm reading as an adult, I'm thinking, now I wonder, was that guy an ongoing character in the book? Is he really dead, or is he Marvel dead? What's going on here? Yeah.
Right. So you see, you didn't have the context at the time for what this means. Is also, what's happening here. I want to talk about Wolfman's writing in a minute, but so basically the story, to sum up, rather than to go through the whole story, because I want to talk about the story in general, and then I want to talk about Lilith.
Okay.
So the story in general is that prior to this, Dracula had a Renfield character called Clifton Graves. I'm pretty sure that was his name. So stupid. Who was a friend of Dracula's descendant, Frank Drake, and Graves gets killed. I'm pretty sure that's his name. Anyway, he got killed like in the first issue. And in this episode, we learn that Dracula has multiple people under his hypnotic sway. He is the Lord of the Undead. He's the Lord of Vampires. And one of those people who is under his hypnotic sway is a member of Parliament, who he has manipulated into getting him diplomatic immunity for anything he might have done in other countries, or here, anything he might do here, so he can not be hounded by the police in London.
Right.
Okay. So that guy has given Dracula's least Dracula, much like Jonathan Harker, this mansion, but Dracula has to get rid of the current occupant, who's a woman named Sheila Whittier. And Sheila Whittier will become a character who goes on for about, I don't remember how long, maybe half a dozen issues or so. And in the original artwork, which I was reading this, I have this probably in 4 formats, but I was reading this in the Complete Collection Volume 2. And unfortunately, the coloring in this is such that it's not as sexy. Like Colan's work on Sheila Whittier isn't quite as sexy with the way that this is colored. But as a kid, I was like, ooh, this is naughty. Not naughty. That's like, but when I was reading this as a kid, I was like, ooh, this is more suggestive. That's a good word.
When you meet her, she's waking up in bed and she has her nightgown on and Colan, he didn't objectify her, certainly, but he draws her sexy, which is what you were supposed to do for the time.
Right. And certainly what Gene did really well. And so anyway, that sort of suggestiveness when I was a kid was like, wow, mixed with the horror, mixed with the fear and the blood and Dracula and the whole thing. It was very much like so many of the movies at the time that I loved, including the Hammer Dracula movies and the TV series Kolchak the Night Stalker. In any case, Sheila Whittier is living in this mansion that, to cut to the chase, two things are happening. She's being, quote unquote, haunted because this guy who's a member of parliament is setting Dracula up to kill him so that he will no longer be controlled by Dracula. Simultaneously, as we'll find out at the very last page of this and in future issues, the house does have a demonic presence in it.
Right.
So there's all this stuff going on. So that's the sort of backbone arc of this issue. But it's not the reason I chose it. The reason I chose it is because it is the introduction, first appearance, origin issue of Lilith, the daughter of Dracula, who is, I feel like, underappreciated character. So you go ahead, because I want to talk about what Lilith is and all of that. Were you at all interested in Lilith?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Her origin is pretty cool, and so here's something I never knew that Marvel's Dracula was actually Vlad Tepes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm reading his origin before he became a vampire. Now, keep in mind, folks, this was published in the 70s, so some of the terms they used back then would not be acceptable today. These days, we would say Romani. In the book, of course, everybody is a gypsy. But, he's basically, when he's still a human, he's forced into marriage with this woman by his father, and he doesn't love her. And at the end of a year, his father dies, and he doesn't need to be with this woman anymore. But they've had a daughter together, and he casts them both aside. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, geez, what a heartless prick. And he's the focus of the book.
He's Dracula.
Yeah,
Of course he's a heartless prick.
But you have that contrasted with his interactions with Sheila. When she falls off the castle parapet and he catches her, he saves her life, when it would be so much easier for him to just get rid of her and take over the fucking castle.
Right. But he can't help but feel some kind of sympathy for her and wants to then protect her.
Right.
He's
so
a very
you
complex
have this
character, Brian. If you read the series front to back,
that's my point. You asked what I thought. I enjoyed the antihero aspects. I enjoyed the fact that he's neither good nor bad. He's a little bit of both, But I thought Lilith's origin was cool. Her Dracula's wife, is cast out, and she basically gives the baby to this Romani woman and pays her gold and says, watch over her because I can't take it, and kills herself. But when Dracula later turns on the Romanis and kills all of them, this woman turns Lilith into a vampire like her father and gives her the ability to basically resurrect herself over and over and over again. That was probably my favorite part of the issue was Lilith actually rising from the grave and possessing the young woman and taking
me too. I mean, let's talk about that, because that to me is the real gem here. Is that so Lilith? So the Romani woman that you're talking about, basically, in order to get vengeance on Dracula, curses young Lilith does all kinds of spells or whatever that turn Lilith into a very unique vampire, not like other vampires at all in the Marvel Universe, and not like her father, in the sense that she becomes a vampire, but her soul, no matter how many times her body is destroyed, her spirit will live on forever.
Right.
And essentially so basically, if Lilith's body is destroyed, she will eventually come back, rise as a spirit to possess the body of a woman or girl who wants to kill her own father.
Yep.
So that's the requirement.
Yep.
So there's this young woman named, I think, Angel O'Hara. Is it O'Hara?
I believe so, yes.
So Angel's father accidentally kills Angel's baby daddy, or actually her husband, because they were secretly married.
Secretly married, because they knew
Angel,
Daddy
in that
would.
moment, wants to kill her father, and that provides the opening for the possessing spirit of Lilith to move in and take over, kill the father, and then go searching for Dracula.
Right.
And she tracks her father down, and she wants Dracula to like work with her, and they'll rule the undead together, and Dracula blows her off. And that's the summary of that story. But to me, it's like, it's the, you see Lilith in full Lilith garb sitting on a stool in a bar, and these guys one guy thinks he's going to go and hit on her and take her home, and his buddies are all like, making fun of him for even thinking he has a chance with her. And he goes over and he leaves with Lilith, and his buddies are like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. But of course, Lilith just takes him back to his apartment, kills him, and drinks his blood. I think that this is a really underutilized character.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And Marvel does so much these days in the current continuity with the end of the world, and you've got Old Man Logan, you've got Punisher in the Apocalypse, you got all these characters in these post-apocalyptic settings. Lilith should be there, and yet you never see her used in any of these.
Yep.
But she would, according to continuity, she would still exist.
Right. Yeah, she absolutely still exists in that. And I will say, I don't get any money for it if people go and buy and read it, but to see me fully indulge my God, I can't believe how long ago this was that I did this, but to see me fully indulge in my love for these characters, I wrote 2 issues of Spider-Man Unlimited many years ago. And one of them, and I'm looking at it now, Spider-Man Unlimited number 20, features Lilith, Simon Garth the Zombie, and Hannibal King.
Nice.
And Topaz, among other characters from that era. So yeah, I just had so much fun with that.
Here's what I want to talk about, and I suspect the listeners will agree with me. And when I say listeners, I'm thinking specifically of you, Hank Wagner. Hello out there, Hank, listening in New Jersey.
Hi, Emma.
Yes, hi, Emma. I mean, your love of this series, is as shining and true as my love of Steve Gerber's Man-Thing. I want you to talk about what it was like for you. Now, it wasn't your first comic. You had established yourself as a professional, but you not only get to write Blade, who's, a pretty big supporting character in this book, but you get to work with Gene Colan himself. What is that like for Chris Golden?
I don't know. I feel like forgive me if you're listening to this and we talked about this before on this.
I don't know. I think you and I have talked about it, but I don't know that we've talked about it on the air.
So,
I'm sorry. I'm totally slipping into old horror show with Brian Keene mode.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I love talking about this because it did mean the world to me. So I started writing comics around the same time I was starting to write novels. But getting into try to write Marvel comics at that age was was very difficult. I mean, to get the editors to listen to you when you weren't a part of the, their circle,
Right.
was very difficult. But I did get a few things, and I had been working in New York from 1989 to 1992, and I had been friends with a couple of the assistant editors there when they were coming up, and had relationships. And I got to know Ralph Macchio, who at the time, not the Karate Kid, the Marvel writer and editor Ralph Macchio, who was a legend already by that time. He started in the Marvel bullpen very young as a writer and editor, and he was an editor still there. And he knew, we talked about it many times, about my love for all of these Marvel characters, particularly for Tomb of Dracula. And if memory serves, they were in the process. The Blade movie was coming. And I got a call out of the blue from Ralph one day, saying, I had a couple novels out at that point, and Ralph said, "Hey, you know what? I want you to fix Blade." Literally were his words.
Yeah.
And by that, what he meant was that the Night Stalkers series had been out and had changed the character somewhat, and that was there was a good series, but Ralph had been part of the process when Blade was the classic version of Blade.
Right.
And Ralph wanted me somehow to return the character to more of its roots. And I was thrilled, obviously. I mean, I couldn't have been happier about it. And but what he also wanted was for me to explain everything. So already, and I wasn't. If I'm a capable comic book writer now, I was not very good at it at the time. Cards on the table. So I wrote an outline for it, and Ralph read it, and he said, "Okay, but you also have to include." It was supposed to be 48 pages.
Right.
You also have to include this. Okay, no problem. And I said, "Ralph, I'm going to get crucified because people are going to assume that writers of novels of prose can't write comics properly because this is going to be incredibly wordy because I've got to explain his whole history, his mother, Deacon Frost, the whole thing, and fit it in with this plot." And he was like, "That's fine. Don't worry about it." Because again, if you look back at this, Wolfman's script is very prose heavy, right?
Yeah.
So Ralph said, "It's fine. It'll just feel like, what the old thing was." So I was all excited, man, because my story was going to have Simon Garth the zombie. It was going to have Brother Voodoo in it, Jericho Drum. It was going to have Deacon Frost. It was going to have a riverboat in New Orleans. You know what I mean? Like all this stuff. I was like, this is going to have Saffron, who was Blade's ex, and all this stuff. And then partway through the process of really writing the breakdowns, because it was Marvel style. And
right.
For people who don't know what Marvel style is, basically you write a breakdown of what happens on each page, but you don't script it. Right. So he called, and I remember very clearly, I was on 93 North, about to get into Boston on the highway, and the phone rang, and it was Ralph Macchio calling, and he said, "Hey, listen, I hope you don't mind, but I think we're going to get Gene Colan to draw this book." And I literally had tears in my eyes.
I can imagine.
Couldn't believe it. Particularly because at that point I knew that Gene had been having a lot of problems with his eyes for many years. I think he had glaucoma, but I can't remember if that's the case. And I just was blown away. But my two favorite parts of the story of having done this book, the first one is that I was sitting at my desk, got a phone call from Gene one day. He was incredibly complimentary, like more so than I think I ever deserved. He was thrilled to be working on it, really excited. And he said something to the effect of, "Hey, Chris, I've got a little problem and I need your help solving it. I'm like, well, what's that? He said, well, I'm on page 24 of it had been shortened to 40 pages by that point.
Okay.
So already I had to fix it so that it was 40 pages instead of 46 or 48. He said, I have a problem. I'm on page 24 of your script. No, I'm on page 24 of the art, but I'm only on page 16 of the script.
Oh, no.
So an already incredibly wordy story then I had to basically say, okay, now I've got to revise this whole thing and excise 8 pages of my original plot and somehow cover that 8 pages of stuff we weren't going to get to see in captions. So if you read the thing now, people must be like, Jesus, this is just like, what is going on here? There's all this information that's just in caption boxes. And it's because Gene was, and what am I going to say? He's Gene Colan.
Well, exactly.
Right? What do you say at that point? No, Gene, you can't,
I have, your feelings for Gene mirror my feelings for Keith Giffen, and I have been in the exact same situation. I've been lucky enough to do several things with Keith, but I'm a professional. But at the end of the day, he's Keith fucking Giffen, and I'm never going to tell him no. I'm going to do whatever I have to do. He comes first.
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, Gene had already drawn it.
Yeah.
And we had a guy named Mark Pennington was the guy who was the inker. And that was the best thing that could have happened because Tom Palmer had been the guy who inked Gene forever. And Pennington did a really excellent job of bringing out the Colanness of Gene's art. And then a couple of other fun facts about the thing. When I finished, when Gene got the art back, I said, Gene, I'd love to buy a page or two of this artwork from you because it's been, one of the honors of my life to do this with you. And he said, no, I had a wonderful time. In fact, in a magazine interview that came out not long after this, he listed his top 3 writers that he'd worked with that he enjoyed working with the most. And Marv Wolfman and I were 2 of those 3.
Holy shit. I did not know that.
Yeah. What an honor that was. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, he was old enough at that point that maybe he didn't remember a lot of the writers that he'd been working with, but no, I just couldn't believe it. I was so thrilled. But anyway, so I asked him if I could buy a page or 2. He said, don't worry about it, kid. I'll send you something. And the next day I got a FedEx box with 19 pages of original artwork from Blade Crescent City Blues. Gene had Mark Pennington had gotten 18 of the pages as the inker. Gene had gotten 22 of the pages as the penciler, saved the 3 he liked the best, and sent me all the rest.
Wow.
Which was incredible. I mean, just such a kind man. And then the final point about this is just a thing I've told friends this before, but I've never spoken about it publicly because I know that some people will be maybe offended by it. I don't know. But Gene, there were a couple original ideas he wanted to get off the ground, and he and I were talking about he wanted to have me write something for him. And one of the ideas he had was something called The Pink Precinct. And it was a comic book about cops in New York City in this one precinct, but all the cops were gay. And I'm like, Gene, we can't do that. I don't think that's going to be appropriate to do. But, he was of an age where he just thought that, and it was weird because I don't think he intended it to be derogatory, but that his idea of this was going to be offensive.
Right.
There's no way to do it without being offensive. But I don't think he meant it to be making fun of gay people. But at his age,
he was of a certain age.
Right, exactly. He was like, this will be great. And I'm like, it'll be like 22 pages an issue of stereotypes about gay people. And I was like, we can't do that, Gene. But yeah, so that's an interesting little nugget. But anyway, there's your answer. I mean, it was getting the call from Ralph that Gene was going to draw the book, and when working with Gene on the book is definitely one of the best things I've ever had happen.
Yeah. So when you're older and grayer than you are now, than we both are now, you can look back on that, and that'll be one of the high points of your career.
I don't know that I can get much grayer, but I'm somewhere between Michael McDonald and Santa at this point. But no, yeah, it absolutely is a massive high point. And I urge you, my friend, like to go back and read. I almost wish now that I had suggested to you that we read. There's a giant size Spider-Man and Dracula.
I own it. I have it.
You do? Okay. Yeah. Good. And again, it's not. I think that this is more representative of what the series. Oh, and I meant to say to you, like, the character Taj Natal, who's an Indian guy who works for Quincy Harker, has gotten a letter in this issue. So you didn't have you didn't have any background to understand.
No, I figured, okay, well, he's another supporting character, you know.
Yeah. Well, and what's happened here is that Taj has gotten a letter from home, and what we'll find out in subsequent issues is that Taj's son in India has been made into a vampire, and Taj's wife, who he's basically left behind, is keeping him strapped down in their house and like feeding him her own blood to keep him alive.
Oh wow.
It's such a great series. There's stuff with Brother Voodoo in here. It's just loaded with great stuff. Anyway,
you know, we often, I don't know that we've ever said it on the air, but you know, we've often said, oh man, if we could cover DC Bronze Age comics as well. You know, we've talked about Commandy and Swamp Thing, but you know, my favorite Marv Wolfman, Gene Colan comic is DC's Night Force. Do you remember that?
Hell yeah.
I bought the first issue. I think I actually picked it up because there was a preview of Teen Titans inside it, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe there was a preview of it inside Teen Titans, but oh my God, I loved that series as a kid.
Yeah.
And still Night do Force. As an adult.
I didn't actually read Night Force when it was first coming out. I read it when I was in college. I had just started reading comics again when I was a sophomore in college, and loving Wolfman and Colan on this, I stumbled upon an issue of Night Force in the back issue boxes, and I collected the whole thing to read it. And what's great about it is that it's short and self-contained. It's like 18 issues or something like that.
Yep.
And it's 14. Collected in. There's like one hardcover now. You can get a collection of the whole thing in one hardcover. It's so worth reading. It's so good.
And you know, I don't know if I'm allowed to tell this story in the air or not, but fuck it, I'm gonna, because you know, DC stopped paying me royalties about the time they were bought out by Time Warner. And
nobody's listening except Hank and Emma. So
yeah, you know, when I was doing a lot for DC, Dan Didio wanted me to pitch some stuff directly to him, you know, go over editorial's head. And one of the things I brought to the meeting was Night Force. And, you know, Dan, to his credit, stopped me. He held up his hand. He stopped me. He said, nobody but Marv and Gene gets to do that. He says, you can use characters. You can use Baron Winter in something else if you want, but nobody does Night Force except them. And I don't think it was a legal thing. I think it was just, he respected the book and those creators enough that he was like, no, nobody else is you know.
Yeah. Well, I have a confession for you. I had pitched Night Force to an editor at DC once upon a time named Lou Stathis.
Yeah.
And Lou loved my Night Force pitch, but said similarly, it's not going to fly but Lou had become then an editor at Vertigo. So he said, file the serial numbers off this, change it enough so that it's not Night Force, and pitch it to me as something different for Vertigo. And so I came up with this pitch called The Gatekeeper. And I spent a year and a half to 2 years developing it with Lou, trying to get it over the home plate there at Vertigo. And Lou had cancer in his brain, and he passed away. And so it was not to be. I'll leave out the diplomatic fallout at that, because I don't want to start trouble with anybody in particular.
Right.
But it was not to be at that point. So I filed the serial numbers off it even further, and Nancy Holder and I did it as a trilogy of Buffy the Vampire Slayer novels called the Gatekeeper Trilogy. Which by that time is basically unrecognizable. The roots of it are unrecognizable unless you really know Night Force, because the house is basically the house from Night Force.
Right.
Yeah. So there you go.
Awesome. There you go. Well, there you go.
Now that you said that, Brian, you must finish your Tomb of Dracula collection so you can read it.
I'm working on it. They are not cheap.
No. And I will say it takes just a little bit to kick in, because it wasn't who was it at the beginning. I'm trying to think who the writer was. Oh wait, I've got it right here.
Was it Len Wein?
It was Jerry Conway.
Oh, okay, Jerry Conway.
Jerry Conway was the writer at the beginning for a handful of issues, and then Marv takes over. And once Marv takes over, it really kicks in, and that's not long into the book. But then it's just so. Anyway, all right, my friend. So what do you want to read for next week?
You know what? We will talk about that off the air, because I'm still debating what we're going to read for next week. Listeners, I don't mean to leave you in the. Should I decide? Can you vamp for me while I decide?
Well, look, I mean, you still have multiple things that you want to cover, and as do I. But I know the one thing you were certain you wanted to cover was Deathlock.
Yes, and that's what I was trying to decide. It will be one of the issues of Deathlock from Astonishing Tales.
Okay. I think that's enough to go on.
Yeah, I just don't know which issue yet.
Yeah. And again, for those who are unfamiliar, the original Deathlock story is also available. I think that's only collected as a Masterworks. I could be wrong.
I believe you are correct, yes.
But it is also available in one volume in a hardcover Marvel Masterworks. But the floppies, I don't think, are that expensive.
No, his first appearance, of course, you're going to pay first appearance prices, but after that, they're $6.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're talking about the original Luther Manning Deathlock, which the first issue is Astonishing Tales number 25, but we'll discuss.
Yeah, some great stuff there from Rich Buckler of Defenders fame. So we'll get to that next week. But before we do that, we would be seriously remiss if we didn't get a hearty, heartfelt holiday Excelsior from Christopher Golden.
I feel like there should be a ho-ho in there somewhere. I feel like you should do Hellcat ho-ho.
Ho, 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 Chris. This is Patsy Walker.
Oh, well, to that I say Excelsior, true believers.
Excelsior indeed. We'll see you next week, folks.
Defenders Dialogue. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Defenders Dialogue is written and produced by Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com.